August 21st, 1976. The Korean Demilitarized Zone, 9 A team of South Korean Special Forces soldiers approached a poplar tree with chainsaws. Their mission: cut it down. Backing them up were 813 military personnel. Attack helicopters circled overhead. Fighter jets flew combat air patrol. B-52 bombers, carrying nuclear weapons, entered South Korean airspace for the first time since the Korean War. An aircraft carrier battle group positioned itself off the coast. All of this for a tree. This wasn't a special tree. It wasn't ancient. It wasn't sacred. It wasn't particularly large or notable. It was just a poplar tree that happened to be blocking the view between two United Nations observation posts in the most militarized border in the world. 3 days earlier, 2 American officers had been murdered while trying to trim this tree, beaten to death with axes and metal pikes by North Korean guards. Now the United States and South Korea were going to remove that tree, and they were going to make absolutely certain North Korea understood the message. Operation Paul Bunyan lasted 42 minutes. The tree was cut down. Not a single shot was fired, but it remains the most overwhelming show of military force ever deployed for what was essentially a gardening task. This is the story of how a tree nearly started World War III, and how its removal became one of the most absurd yet perfectly executed military operations in history. This is War Blunders. To understand why cutting down a tree required an army, we need to understand the Korean Demilitarized Zone. The Korean War ended in 1953 with an armistice, not a peace treaty. North and South Korea are technically still at war. The DMZ is a 160-mile-long, 2.5-mile-wide buffer zone separating the two countries. It's called demilitarized, but it's actually the most heavily militarized border on Earth. Millions of landmines, barbed wire, watchtowers, armed guards on both sides, constant surveillance, occasional firefights and incidents. Within the DMZ is the Joint Security Area at Panmunjom. This is where North and South Korea meet for negotiations, and where the border is marked by a low concrete curb. You can literally step from one country to the other. The JSA was jointly patrolled by UN forces, mainly American and South Korean and North Korean forces. Both sides maintained observation posts to watch each other. In the mid-1970s, there was a problem. A poplar tree, about 40 feet tall, had grown up between 2 UN observation posts. It blocked the line of sight between them, creating a blind spot. This was a security concern. The tree provided cover that North Korean forces could use to approach without being seen. The UN command wanted it removed or trimmed. The tree was technically in the UN sector of the JSA, but these things were complicated. Any action in the JSA could be interpreted as provocative. Both sides were hypersensitive to perceived slights or violations of the armistice agreement. The North Koreans had previously objected to any work on the tree. They claimed the tree had been planted by Kim Il-sung himself, the founder and leader of North Korea. Whether this was true or not, it gave them an excuse to oppose its removal. The UN command decided to trim the tree, not remove it entirely. This seemed like a reasonable compromise. Cut back the branches blocking the view, leave the tree standing. On August 18, 1976, a work crew was assembled. Captain Arthur Boniface and First Lieutenant Mark Barrett, both U.S. Army officers, led a team of 5 South Korean workers armed with axes and tools to trim the tree. A security force of 11 South Korean and American soldiers accompanied them, armed but with orders not to provoke the North Koreans. It was a routine work detail. They'd done similar tree trimming operations before. There was no reason to expect trouble. At 10:30 a.m., the work crew arrived at the tree and began trimming branches. Within minutes, a North Korean officer, Senior Lieutenant Pak Chul, approached with 2 guards. He told the UN forces to stop work. Captain Boniface, the ranking American officer, explained that this was routine maintenance in the UN sector. They had the right to trim the tree. He ordered the work to continue. Lieutenant Pak left. The UN workers kept cutting branches. 15 minutes later, Pak returned with approximately 15 to 20 North Korean guards. He repeated his demand that the work stop. Captain Boniface again refused and told his men to continue working. That's when everything went wrong. What happened next was sudden and brutal. Lieutenant Pak gave a signal. He reportedly said, "Kill them all!" The North Korean guards attacked. Some grabbed the axes being used to trim the tree. Others pulled out metal pikes that had been hidden nearby. They swarmed the UN forces. Captain Boniface was struck from behind with an axe. He went down immediately. The North Koreans continued attacking him, beating him with clubs and kicking him as he lay on the ground. First, Lieutenant Barrett tried to radio for help. A North Korean gozherd hit him with a karate chop to the neck, then beat him with a metal pike. Other guards joined in, attacking him with clubs and kicks. The other UN soldiers tried to fight back and help the officers, but they were outnumbered. Several were badly injured. The South Korean workers fled toward the UN checkpoint. A U.S. soldier, Corporal Edward Banal, tried to reach Captain Boniface, but was beaten back by multiple North Korean guards. He saw Boniface lying motionless, surrounded by North Koreans who were still striking him. The attack lasted only a few minutes, but it was savage. Captain Boniface died from massive head injuries. His skull was crushed. First Lieutenant Barrett died from similar injuries shortly after being evacuated. 9 other UN personnel were injured, some seriously. The North Koreans then retreated to their side of the JSA. They left the bodies and the wounded where they fell. UN forces scrambled to evacuate the casualties. It was chaos, blood everywhere. 2 American officers dead, multiple soldiers wounded, all over a tree trimming operation. The news reached UN command within minutes. American military commanders in South Korea were notified immediately. Word reached the Pentagon. President Gerald Ford was informed. The reaction was fury. 2 American officers had been murdered in broad daylight. This wasn't a firefight or an accident. This was premeditated murder. The question was what to do about it. Some commanders wanted immediate retaliation, strike North Korean guard posts, attack their facilities in the GSA. Others counseled restraint. Any military action could trigger a wider war. President Ford and his advisors faced a dilemma. They needed to respond forcefully to show that murdering American officers had consequences. But they couldn't risk starting World War III over a tree. The solution they came up with was brilliant in its simplicity. Finish the job, cut down the tree, but do it with such overwhelming force that North Korea wouldn't dare interfere. Send a message. You killed our men. Now we're cutting down the tree. And if you try to stop us, you'll face the full might of the United States military. The operation was codenamed Paul Bunyan, after the legendary American lumberjack. It would be the most over-engineered tree removal in human history. For 3 days, the U.S. and South Korean militaries planned. This wasn't going to be a simple work crew with a few guards. This was going to be a demonstration of overwhelming force. If North Korea wanted a fight, they'd get one. But the hope was that the sheer scale of the operation would deter them from attacking. Every detail was planned. What troops would participate, what equipment would be used, what the escalation ladder looked like if North Korea did attack. Contingency plans upon contingency plans. The tree removal team would be South Korean special forces, trained soldiers who could fight if necessary, not civilian workers. They'd use chainsaws for speed. They'd be backed by a 64-man security force armed with pistols and axe handles. Why axe handles instead of rifles? To mirror the weapon used to kill the American officers, a symbolic message. Behind them, A 30-man South Korean Taekwondo team, experts in hand-to-hand combat who could kill with their bare hands. No weapons needed. Engineer units with equipment to remove the tree stump entirely if needed. Mine-clearing vehicles in case North Korea had planted mines near the tree. Armored personnel carriers, machine gun positions. Attack helicopters, Cobra gunships, would circle overhead, ready to provide fire support. Transport helicopters with infantry units ready to deploy if fighting broke out. Fighter jets, F-4 Phantoms, and F-111s would fly combat air patrol over the JSA. And here's where it gets truly overwhelming. B-52 bombers would fly in South Korean airspace for the first time since the Korean War. They'd be carrying nuclear weapons. Not that they'd be dropped, but North Korea would detect them and understand the message. An aircraft carrier battle group, the USS Midway and her escorts, would position off the coast. All of this to cut down one tree. The total force involved in Operation Paul Bunyan, 813 personnel directly in or near the JSA, with thousands more on standby. North Korea would see the largest military mobilization since the war. For a tree. August 21st, 1976, 7:00 a.m., 3 days after the murders. The operation began with a massive show of force visible from North Korea's observation posts. UN forces moved into position. Trucks, armored vehicles, helicopters. Soldiers everywhere. At South Korean and American bases, alert levels went to maximum. Artillery was prepared. Infantry units were ready to deploy. Fighter jets on runways, engines running. North Korea watched. Their observation posts reported the buildup. Within hours, they began mobilizing their own forces in response. By 9:00 a.m., North Korean forces had assembled approximately 150-200 troops on their side of the JSA. More were visible in positions farther back. Everyone was on edge. This was the moment of maximum danger. If North Korea chose to attack, if someone fired a shot, if anyone made a wrong move, this could spiral into full-scale war in seconds. But that was exactly what the overwhelming force was designed to prevent. North Korea had to look at the assembled military power and decide, is this tree worth it? The answer, they decided, was no. At 9:00 a.m., the tree removal team moved forward, South Korean Special Forces soldiers with chainsaws. Behind them, the 64-man security force with pistols and axe handles fanned out in a defensive perimeter. Cobra attack helicopters descended, hovering low over the work site, their weapons clearly visible. The sound was deafening. The message was clear. F-4 Phantom jets screamed overhead on combat air patrol. Their engines echoed across the DMZ, and somewhere above, invisible but detected by radar, B-52 bombers cruised through South Korean airspace. North Korea knew they were there, knew what they carried. The Special Forces soldiers started their chainsaws. The high-pitched whine cut through the tension. They approached the poplar tree, the tree that had been the site of murder 3 days earlier, and began cutting. The North Korean troops watched. They had weapons. They outnumbered the immediate work crew. But they looked at the helicopters overhead, heard the jets, knew about the B-52s, and saw the security forces ready to fight. They did nothing. The chainsaw operators worked with military efficiency. They weren't just cutting down a tree. They were executing a combat operation that happened to involve forestry equipment. The tree came down in sections. First the upper branches, then larger limbs, then the trunk itself. Every piece that fell was quickly dragged away by other soldiers. They weren't taking chances that North Korea might claim the tree or try to replant it. The operation took 42 minutes from first cut to final removal. The tree was completely gone. Even the stump was removed. Throughout those 42 minutes, tensions remained at maximum. Every soldier on both sides was hyper alert, fingers on triggers, helicopters circling, jets overhead, One shot, one miscommunication, one aggressive move from either side, and this would become a bloodbath. But discipline held, training held. The overwhelming force did its job. It made the cost of interfering too high. At 9:42 a.m., the operation was complete. The tree was gone. The work crew withdrew. The security forces pulled back. The helicopters climbed to safer altitude. Not a single shot had been fired. The aftermath was careful and measured. UN forces didn't celebrate or gloat. They simply returned to their posts. The equipment was packed away. The extra troops stood down, but the message had been sent and received. That afternoon, North Korea's state radio made a surprising announcement. Kim Il-sung himself had issued a statement expressing regret over the incident of August 18th. This was extraordinary. North Korea never admits fault, never apologizes, never shows weakness, but they just watched the United States deploy nearly 1,000 troops, attack helicopters, fighter jets, bombers, and a carrier battle group to cut down a tree. They understood what that meant. The statement didn't exactly apologize for the murders. It said the incident was regrettable and that measures would be taken to prevent such incidents in the future. It was as close to an apology as North Korea ever gives, and it was enough to defuse the crisis. Over the following weeks, both sides pulled back from maximum alert. New protocols were established for the JSA to prevent similar incidents. The area where the tree had stood remained clear, a reminder of what had happened. Operation Paul Bunyan is studied in military academies worldwide as a perfect example of deterrence through overwhelming force. The goal wasn't to fight North Korea. It was to make fighting so clearly disadvantageous that they wouldn't even try. Every element of the operation was designed for psychological impact. The tree could have been cut down by a few soldiers with handsaws, but that wasn't the point. The point was to demonstrate that the United States could and would deploy massive force when its personnel were murdered, that any aggression would be met with overwhelming response. The symbolism mattered, using axe handles instead of rifles. That referenced the murder weapon, having a taekwondo team that could kill without weapons. That said, we don't even need guns to defeat you. The B-52s with nuclear weapons? That said, this could escalate as far as you want to take it. It was psychological warfare at its finest. Every detail sent a message. And it worked. North Korea got the message. They backed down. They issued their statement of regret. The crisis ended. From a military perspective, the operation was flawless. The planning was meticulous. The execution was precise. The timing was perfect. The escalation was controlled. Not a single casualty on either side during the operation. The objective was achieved. The deterrent effect was established. And the crisis was defused. It's actually one of the most successful military operations of the Cold War, despite its absurd premise. The operation also established important precedents for the JSA. New protocols were created. The JSA was divided more clearly. UN forces on the south side, North Korean forces on the north side, with joint patrols eliminated. This reduced the chance of future incidents. The tree removal had been a tragedy, but the response established rules that probably prevented future tragedies. The site where the tree stood became known as Freedom's Oak, or the Bridge of No Return area, a reminder of both the incident and the response. For the families of Captain Boniface and Lieutenant Barrett, the operation provided some measure of justice. Their murderers were never punished. North Korea never admitted who specifically was responsible, but their deaths were not ignored. The United States responded forcefully. The tree they died trying to trim was removed. Both officers were posthumously awarded medals. Boniface received the Meritorious Service Medal. Barrett received the same. Camp Boniface, a UN military installation near the DMZ, was named in the captain's honor. The incident had political ramifications too. It occurred during the U.S. presidential election of 1976. President Ford's handling of the crisis, firm but not reckless, was generally praised. It demonstrated American resolve without risking war. The operation showed that even in the Cold War, even on the knife's edge of potential nuclear conflict, it was possible to respond to aggression proportionally and effectively. Today, Operation Paul Bunyan is remembered with a mix of pride and bemusement. Pride because it was brilliantly executed and achieved its objectives. Bemusement because it's still absurd that cutting down a tree required 800 troops and a carrier battle group. Military historians point to it as an example of successful deterrence. Politicians cite it as an example of peace through strength, and everyone else just finds it darkly funny that a tree became the focal point of an international crisis. The Korean DMZ remains one of the most dangerous places on Earth. Incidents still occur. Gunfire across the border, defectors trying to cross, occasional skirmishes. But nothing quite like the axe murder incident has happened since. Maybe that's because of Operation Paul Bunyan. Maybe North Korea learned that attacking UN personnel has consequences. Maybe the overwhelming response established a deterrent that has lasted for decades. Or maybe it's just that trees in the DMZ are no longer allowed to grow tall enough to block sight lines. Operation Paul Bunyan is unique among military operations. Most operations aim to capture territory, destroy enemy forces, or achieve strategic objectives. This operation's objective was to cut down a single tree, and to send a message while doing it. It's simultaneously the most ridiculous and most perfectly executed operation in modern military history. Ridiculous because of the sheer overkill. No rational person would deploy 800 troops, attack helicopters, bombers, and a carrier group to remove one tree. But perfectly executed because every element worked exactly as intended. The tree was removed. North Korea was deterred. The crisis was resolved. No additional casualties occurred. It's also a perfect Cold War story. The tensions, the brinkmanship, the symbolic gestures, the overwhelming force held in check by mutual understanding of potential escalation. All the elements of Cold War military doctrine compressed into 42 minutes of chainsaw operation, and it's a story about how small incidents can become international crises. A tree blocking a view between observation posts. Under normal circumstances, you trim it with a few workers and move on. But when that tree is in the DMZ, when tensions are high, when both sides are looking for any sign of weakness or aggression, when a simple trimming operation leads to murder, suddenly that tree becomes the most important tree in the world. Today, if you visit the Korean DMZ, tour guides will tell you about the axe murder incident and Operation Paul Bunyan. They'll point out where the tree used to stand. The area is clear now. Good sight lines between the observation posts. Mission accomplished. At the cost of 2 American lives and 1 very unlucky tree. That was Operation Paul Bunyan, the most overwhelming military force ever deployed for gardening, the tree that required an army, the 42-minute operation that perfectly demonstrated Cold War deterrence doctrine. Ridiculous, brilliant, and somehow completely effective.